This is a record of my fourth trip to Angkor the Great, one of the largest and most beautiful cities of the ancient world and the capital of the Khmer Empire. Angkor lies in the country that's known now as Cambodia, near the Tonle Sap, the Great Lake. At its height, the Khmer Empire included Cambodia, Thailand, and parts of Burma and Vietnam. The city was occupied from about 800 to 1431, when it was abandoned, and they moved the capital eventually to what it is today, Phnom Penh, down the river. The Tonle Sap, the Great Lake, is a secret to why Angkor flourished in the first place. The city of Angkor is so huge that it can actually be seen from outer space. It covers at least 77 square miles, with artificial reservoirs up to 5 miles long, and may have contained as much as 1 million people at its height. The most famous complex at Angkor is Angkor Wat, which was dedicated to the god Vishnu, the preserver god of the great Hindu triad of 3 gods, early in the 12th century by Suryavarman II. Here we see it from a distance with its 5-towered structure representing Mount Meru in the Himalayas. It's a mandala, a cosmogram. Angkor Wat is surrounded by a great square moat. We see here only part of it. Angkor Wat itself is the largest religious structure in the world. And beyond its western entrance, which we see, are the 5 towers of the center of the city. It's approached by a causeway which leads across the moat. It's venerated by the Buddhists today, and inside is a statue of the 8-armed Hindu god Vishnu, to whom Suryavarman dedicated the structure. He's now considered to be a Lokeshvara, the Buddha of compassion. The bas-reliefs inside the galleries of Angkor Wat are the longest and largest bas-reliefs in the world, and show battle scenes and other details from the great Hindu epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. There are graphic displays of Khmers in battle. The ancient Khmer, the ancient Cambodians, were always fighting wars with their enemies and probably with rivals within the empire, using spears and shields, cavalry. This is a procession, a parade of the cavalry, bowmen, and other foot soldiers of Suryavarman II himself. Each personage wears a distinctive headdress. Most colorful are the Thai mercenaries shown here, wearing what look like dreadlocks, but in actuality they're probably wigs. Part of the monkey army that's talked about in the Ramayana, grieving for one of their lost leaders, Valin, who was killed in a struggle with his rival Sugriva. And the monkeys are weeping and pointing up towards the dead monkey general. Even today, Buddhists are in every part of the great structure. These are Buddhist prayer flags. Ever since the abandonment of Angkor in 1431, Buddhist monks have continued to occupy this great structure. The Apsaras are celestial maidens, and probably are portraits of actual harem girls and concubines of the king himself. The main tower, the central tower of Angkor Wat, represents the main peak of Mount Meru in the Himalayas, and was the principal shrine of the god Vishnu. It was probably funerary and contained eventually the ashes of Suryavarman himself. A statue of the Buddha that certainly was put there after the abandonment of Angkor, and as it continued to be a monastery. There are wonderful details of women's costumes of court ladies at Angkor in these Apsaras figures. Apsaras are everywhere in Angkor Wat, and their distinctive headdresses, which differ from one pair of Apsaras to another, may represent different ethnic identifications, or it may be that they are from different provinces within the empire. These are elephants which were rented for a wedding at Angkor Wat between a young European man with a Cambodian girl. The couple hired a troupe of classical dancers and musicians. Young dancers dressing inside Angkor Wat for the performance. the prima ballerina of the company in the dance of the Apsaras. Saffron-robed monks going to their monastery hall near Angkor Wat for their only meal of the day. During the terrible Khmer Rouge period, Pol Pot and his killers massacred tens of thousands of Buddhist monks in an attempt to stamp out Buddhism, but has had a wonderful rebirth in Cambodia today. Carrying his filled begging bowl. Angkor Wat at sunrise. Angkor Wat was laid out astronomically by Hindu astrologer gurus. The equinoxes, the solstices were all marked here. The largest complex of all at Angkor is Angkor Thom, a city within a city, a great square which was the royal capital of Jayavarman VII, built at the end of the 12th century after Angkor Wat. Over 7 miles of surrounding walls and a moat mark it, with the Bayon at the very center. It's Buddhist. Jayavarman VII was a Buddhist and established Buddhism as a state religion. Inside Angkor Thom is the royal palace. Angkor Thom has 5 great gates. This is one of them. And the towers in the center at the Bayon show Jayavarman VII as a Lokeshvara, as a compassionate Buddha of the future. The gates are high enough for elephants to pass through. Each of the causeways leading to the gates has a balustrade with demons and gods holding a primordial serpent. At the very center of Angkor Thom is the Bayon, the exact center of the square city within a city. It's a complex mandala with a Buddha image at its core. On the reliefs of the Bayon are scenes of domestic life. Here, probably a palace scene. Structures built of wood, raised on wooden piles. Servants cooking fish on spits over a fire. A market scene. All of the principal structures had tile roofs, glazed in yellow. A cockfight among the Bayon reliefs. Wonderful scenes of daily life. Perhaps a fortune-telling scene. These are the Bayon towers. The Chinese diplomat Zhou Daguan tells us that the central tower was covered with gold. The face of Jayavarman VII, as Lokeshvara looks out at you everywhere in the Bayon. Celestial dancers on the pillars of the Bayon. They wear considerably fewer clothes than the dancers of today. There was a great battle between the Chams and the Khmers after the accession of Jayavarman VII, taking revenge on the Chams, who are Malayo-Polynesian-speaking peoples from Vietnam. They're great enemies. Great naval and land battle. The revenge was because in 1177 the Chams actually took and sacked the capital before Jayavarman acceded to the throne. They are the traditional enemies of the Khmer. Cham bowmen. Strange flower-like hats. An amputee fiddler in the Bayonne complex, victim of one of the many millions of landmines laid down by the Khmer Rouge and others during the horrible 70s and 80s. An outer wall of the royal palace within Angkor Thom. The structure called the Pimeneyakas within the royal palace was a private temple of the royal family. According to Zhou Daguan, the king would climb up every day to a golden tower on the summit and sleep there with a female genie, he describes. If she failed to appear to him, his death was at hand. A pool in the royal palace. Around the water it's completely carved with fish, crocodiles, water monsters. The elephant terrace is at the east end of the palace enclosure. Royal elephants were used in battles and in parades. From the elephant terrace, the king and the royal family viewed processions, pageants, fireworks displays, which were on an immense scale. And probably tens of thousands of the citizens came out here to watch the wonderful goings-on. Around a giant Buddhist statue, widows like to gather today to pray and gossip. Widows in Cambodia shave their heads. These old ladies are chewing betel nut, which stains their mouths reddish black. a traditional Cambodian water wheel within Angkor, used for irrigating fields. In this case, it's used to irrigate an experimental garden under the patronage of the king, Norodom Sihanouk. The Srasrang, the so-called royal pool, lying well to the east of Angkor Thom. It's about 700 meters long and lined with laterite and sandstone. One of the immense waterworks structures in Angkor, but not one of the very largest. Ta Prohm, a Buddhist temple complex of Jayavarman VII, the great king, built in the late 12th century. It has been left by French archaeologists as it was when it was first seen by the explorer naturalist Henri Mouot in the early 1860s, to give an idea of what the city once looked like in its ruined state. And it's a very romantic place. Each of the female figures shown here is a Devata, a celestial goddess in a flame-like niche. The Devatas were denizens of Indra's paradise, the paradise of the Hindu sky god, the ruler of the gods. Hinduism and Buddhism coexisted side by side here, and the Hindu gods were the protectors of Buddhism. The ruins are in the grip of trees, bombox and strangler fig trees. Here a strangler fig has got its clutches on an enormous tropical forest tree. Eventually it will kill it and replace it. one of the outer walls of Ta Prohm. An eroded relief which probably represents Lokeshvara being worshipped by Hindu protector deities. Apsaras. Prakan is another complex lying immediately northeast of Angkor Thom.
This is a particular group of monuments that are the first introduction of Buddhism, the three of them being Ta Prohm, which you have been to yet or not? You've been to Ta Prohm, great. Yeah. Ta Prohm, Bante Kadai, and Prakan. And they were constructed by Jayavarman VII, a name I'm sure you've all heard of, at the end of the 12th century. 1191 was the date that Prakan was founded. 1186 was the date of Ta Prohm, and Bante Kadai was probably earlier, but it's one of the very few sites where there isn't an inscription. All the information we have derived on Prakan was included on an inscription which was placed in the center of the temple complex, and so these vague numbers that I chuck around are actually all real. Prakan was founded on probably a battle site where Jayavarman VII beat the Cham, and so therefore it's a very significant site. And a lot of the central area we will pass through, there are a lot of little shrines which were all dedicated actually to his generals in recognition of the help that they'd given him in beating the hell out of the Cham. As you've seen probably in the Bayon, certainly in Angkor Wat, that Cambodia has been at war forever. I mean, it's a lifelong or a history-long struggle of battles and fights, and they've always been squabbling. So really what we're going through at this particular period is not unusual. And so there was a big battle here, and then Jayavarman VII built Prakan, which is a very ecumenical site. The central section of Prakan is dedicated to the Buddha, or Buddhism. Jayavarman, in fact, reintroduced Buddhism to Cambodia, or to the Khmer Kingdom. It was introduced very much earlier, probably through Indian influence, but he visited Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was in those days, and had brought back Buddhism, and he was totally fascinated by it, and therefore was very keen to promote it in his kingdom. And what's quite interesting is that very shortly after that, possibly during, most probably during the reign of Jayavarman VIII, there was a total reaction to Buddhism. And as I'll show you going through Prakan, there are many examples of the first form of vandalism, the first type of vandalism, which was iconoclasm, bringing back Hinduism. And I'm sure Mike's told you a little bit about the two religions. The other religions that are represented here are obviously Hindu, and we'll be passing through one of the Hindu temple complexes in our passage through Prakan, and the other one is dedicated to Shiva. And on the southern side, this is north, this is south. On the southern side, the whole section of Prakan to the south was dedicated to the worship of ancestors, the Devaraja cults, the Brahmanism, what have you.
The main entrance to Prakan. One of the giant balustrades. The heads are missing, probably taken to Bangkok to the antique dealers during the terrible Khmer Rouge period. But at Prakan, a few still remain of the heads. A moat and the outer wall of Prakan. The moat lotus-filled. Along the outer wall are giant Garuda figures. Garudas are part eagle, part human, and they are, like other Hindu gods, protectors of the Buddhist religion. The moat surrounding Prakan. Figure of a Naga, a 7 or 9-headed serpent, a cobra, which is also the protector of the Buddha and of Buddhism.
Two-story pavilion, that's what we call it. There are lots of myths and legends as to what it was used for. One of them being that it was the place where the Prakan, or the sacred sword, was kept. The sacred sword was representative of the king, and so it was very sacred, and he would, during several processions where the king was not able to attend, he would send his sword instead. So the belief is that it was kept here, and was more recently, in recent history, it disappeared like everything else to Bangkok. And so there is a quest for the sacred sword in Bangkok going on at the moment, but I doubt if it's actually true.
High-ranking monks within the Prakan complex. The Court of the Dancers, near the center of Prakan. We had a special dance performance there, of classical dance, courtesy of John Sanday.
This is a local group that comes from just behind your hotel, the Wat Bo School, and it's a group that has been put together really over the last few years by a wonderful lady, Miss Madame Huang, who we'll see in a minute. And she was a professional dancer and managed to survive the Khmer Rouge period. And so now she's actually training up this local group. And some of their very first performances were actually public performances were here in Prakan. So they have a great affinity with the place. And they love to come out and dance. The band is, or the musicians are a traditional group of musicians who play regularly for this group. And in fact, what they're trying now to do is to get their own band together so that they can have their own group.
The Bakong is an early temple mountain dating to about 881 AD and was dedicated to Shiva, the god of the royal line, the god who was a patron of the king himself. The early pyramid temples look remarkably Maya, but of course they are later than the temples of the Yucatan and the Petén. There are inscriptions, and here is an inscription in the Bakong. Inscriptions here are in Sanskrit and in Khmer, and contain a very truncated kind of history, not history in our sense. There's a large Buddhist community attached to the Bakong, a very active one. Bakse Chamkrong, a temple pyramid which really looks like a temple in Tikal, dates to 947 AD and contained, we know from the inscriptions, a golden statue of the Hindu god Shiva. It represents Mount Kailasa, the abode of Shiva himself in the Himalayas. One of the villages in the Angkor area. The houses are on stilts, traditionally with thatched roofs. This being the dry season, the rice paddies have already been harvested, and the domestic animals like water buffaloes and cows and pigs are gleaning what they can among the rice husks. Water buffalo. People, especially children, are still threshing what rice they can out of the cut and harvested rice. A Cambodian cart, not in any way different from the carts that you see in the Bayon reliefs. These country people suffered terribly in the Khmer Rouge period. Sugar palms dominate the landscape in Cambodia, used for sugar, for wine, for the thatch, which can be gotten from their foliage. If they can avoid the many, many landmines, the life of the peasants in Cambodia is not all that bad now. Banteay Srey, the citadel of women, to the northeast of Angkor, is a miniature architectural and sculptural masterpiece. Built by royal gurus in the year 967. In other words, it's pre-Angkor Wat, out of hard red sandstone. It's certainly the most beautiful part of the large city of Angkor itself, famous for its wonderful carved lintels, bearing scenes from the great Hindu epics and of the Hindu gods. A tiny temple complex dominated by huge trees. On one lintel, an incarnation of Vishnu tearing apart a demon foe. The god Shiva's wife Uma, flanked by elephants, symbols of fertility. Another wonderfully Baroque lintel of a Hindu god. A false door underneath a freestanding structure. The ogre king Ravana shaking the mountain Kailasa to disturb Shiva's meditation. These are the greatest of all reliefs at Angkor. A youthful Dvarapala. The Dvarapalas are celestial guardians of doors and doorways. Every square inch of Bante Asre has been carved. A Devata, one of the celestial maidens in a flame-like niche. These Devatas gave their name to the site, the citadel of women. In 1923, the famous French writer André Malraux and some companions looted the site, stole sculptures, and were finally caught with these sculptures and arrested. There was an outcry among French intellectuals and he was freed. He later became Charles de Gaulle's Minister of Culture. The Lord Krishna, an incarnation of Vishnu, killing a demon. Siem Reap, the provincial capital, just to the south of Angkor. This is the jumping off place to go to the ruins of Angkor. The Siem Reap River goes through it. You can see fish rising here early in the morning. Siem Reap has a wonderful market with all sorts of produce being sold here. Cucumbers. Fish, the major source of protein to the Cambodians, to the Khmer today, now and 1,000 years ago. Much of it coming from the river, but most of it from the Great Tonle Sap, just to the south. Catfish. All sorts of garden vegetables. French bread, baguette, the only lasting legacy of the French colonial occupation. Everything else is gone, even their language. In Siem Reap there's a workshop with contemporary sculptors making replicas for the tourist market, using techniques probably not much different than what the ancient artisans of Angkor used 1,000 years ago. The Siem Reap River heads south towards the Tonle Sap, towards the Great Lake. Many villages are along this river. The Cambodian water wheel, used to irrigate rice paddies here. This water runs out towards the fields, so that rice can be produced even during the dry season. This is how the Khmer can get 2 or 3 crops a year. There are lots of fish even in the river itself, even before you get to the Tonle Sap. This river finally ends up in the Great Lake itself. The Great Lake is, of course, the Tonle Sap. During the rainy monsoon season, the main Tonle Sap River, a tributary of the Mekong, backs up and flows into the lake. It flows back into the Tonle Sap, and the lake expands to 4 times its dry season size. During the dry season, the river reverses and the lake drains, leaving a rich mud for planting rice. The city of Angkor was almost certainly placed where it was because of its proximity to the Tonle Sap. As the lake recedes, farmers come and plant in the mud that has been left by the flooding of the waters. The Great Lake is to Angkor civilization, really what the Nile was to ancient Egypt. We went down this river to the Tonle Sap, to its mouth. Brilliant green fields, paddies of new rice that has been planted in the mud of the receding lake. At the mouth of the river itself are floating villages, mostly Vietnamese fishermen. These were terribly persecuted by the Khmer Rouge, by Pol Pot and his killers. A great hulking riverboat that has come up from Phnom Penh. Much of the fish that's caught here is turned into a kind of fermented fish paste, evil smelling. A pound along the river, near its mouth, which is being used to fatten up carp and other fish for the Siem Reap and Phnom Penh markets. Python, a pet of a small kid in one of these floating village houses along the side of the Siem Reap River at its mouth. Totally harmless, but beautiful. Everything afloat, even houses. And finally, the great lake itself, the Tonle Sap, like an inland sea. The true and ultimate secret for the rise of Angkor civilization.